The College Football Playoff Committee got it right when it comes to the Utah Utes for back-to-back weeks, but some people at ESPN aren't happy about where Utah's at.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. Thank you all for making us your first listen and view of the day, and a special shout out to our everydayers. My name is JT Wistrcill, and on today's show, we're going to talk about, can the Big 12 still get 3 teams in the college football playoff? We're also going to talk about, hey, is this Utah team actually one of the 12 best teams, 13 best teams in college football? Shahan Jeharaja of CBS Sports, a national college football writer, is going to join me for the second and third segment. But in the first segment, we have to react to these rankings. And these rankings, I'm very pleased with them. I'm very happy that Utah stayed put, because there is always a little bit of the nerves when you factor in, I trust this committee so far, but big brand bias is very real. And there are some big brands, Miami, Vandy, just more so from an SEC standpoint, a big brand behind Utah. So I think there was some concern and worry that would they find a reason to move those teams up? And obviously you can't take anything from Utah. They had a bye week, so they shouldn't have dropped it all. And the committee did the right thing. They left the Utah Utes where they should be, at number 13 in the country. But Greg McElroy, who was on the panel, a ESPN college football analyst, former Bama QB, called into question why Utah was there. He doesn't love Utah. He thinks they're a little overvalued. And I think it's fair if you have questions about Utah. But I think when you dive into Utah's resume, Georgia Tech, Miami, Vandy, all the ones around them, you come to a pretty quick conclusion that Utah, not a pretty quick, I'll say, but you come to the conclusion that Utah does belong ahead of those teams. First, let's remind people just how good this Utah Utes team is currently playing right now. I genuinely think they are playing like one of the top 12 teams in the country. I totally get why they're 13. I think they're playing better than BYU right now. That's not a hot take. BYU belongs above Utah right now, because they have the head-to-head. But BYU better not slip, because we've seen this committee with where Notre Dame is versus Miami, how they view head-to-head as the year goes on, and it's based on how you're playing right now. So that BYU team better not slip again. So how good is this Utah team? Well, there are only 3 teams in the country that are in the top 8 of scoring offense and defense. Indiana, arguably the best team in college football. Texas Tech, best team in the Big 12 and arguably one of the 5 best teams in the country, and the good old Utah Utes. That's right. Those 3 teams that I just mentioned, Indiana, Texas Tech, and the good old Utah Utes, are also top 5 in scoring margin. Utah is the 5th best scoring margin in the country at plus 21.5. And let's not forget how good Utah runs the ball. No program in the P4 runs it better on a yards per game basis than Utah Utes. They're 3rd in the country. Only 2 service schools are ahead of them. So the Utah Utes with the 3rd best yards per game in the country, 267, the best among P4 teams. Also, I mentioned scoring margin, but even since the Tech game, in Utah's last 5 games, so if we go since the Tech game, post the Tech game, what have you looked like after a Tech game? This includes a loss to BYU. In Utah's last 5 games, they're outscoring their opponents 209-69. That's right. They have 114 more points than their last 5 opponents. This Utah team has become a juggernaut. As I said last week, they are absolutely dominating the opposition. And that is the key difference between Utah and the other teams around them, is a level of dominance that the Utah team is displaying. Yes, Utah has a couple of losses. We are not trying to take those losses away. Miami, the team Greg McElroy in particular was kind of vouching for, it felt like to be above Utah. Miami has no doubt they have better wins right now, right? They had the huge win over Notre Dame. They also got a big win early on against the South Florida at the time, too, of Florida. So they have some nice wins in there, too. And Utah has the win over Cincinnati, which I still think is a better win than maybe the South Florida win. But there's no doubt Miami has some really good wins. But you know what else Miami's done? Look shaky against some not great competition. How about only winning by 6 against Florida State? I know it was at the Seminoles, but that Florida State team has become dreadful. How about what they did lose the game to Miami? We talked about that. They beat Stanford. They actually looked a little shaky to start that Stanford game. And then you lose to an SMU team. I like SMU. I think they're a solid team this year. But this is also let's just call it what it is. SMU has some terrible losses on their resume. They lost to Baylor, SMU lost to Baylor, TCU, another Texas school, and Wake Forest. That's not good. So SMU is an inconsistent team, and you go and you lose to them. If you're one of the best teams in college football, you shouldn't lose to an SMU to me. Like, you should be able to pound them, because that's what Utah's done. They have pounded teams. They lost to what I deem one of the 5 best teams in the country, the Texas Tech Red Raiders. The Utah Utes did lose that game. We are not trying to sugarcoat that. But we also can look at that game, and I feel like Oklahoma gets the benefit of the doubt for their bad performance against Texas because what? John Mateer wasn't healthy. And I know good old Kyle Whittingham didn't put Cam Rising on the injury report, or the injury availability report, excuse me. But Cam Rising was not healthy for that Texas Tech game. So if we're going to factor in the fact that Mateer played that game and wasn't healthy, I think it's fair if we factor in that this Utah team against Tech in the game, they got blown out in the end. Also, let's talk about this. Like for this Utah team, yes, they got blown out by Tech. They played Tech closer than BYU did. That's just a fact. And you look at the score difference with 8 minutes to go in the fourth quarter of the Utah Tech game, BYU Tech game, Utah played them closer. Like it's just straight up what happened. Like it is a 3-point game. The Utah Tech game was at that point, and the BYU Tech game was 26-0. Like, so, like I said, it's not even a competition of which team played the opposite closer. But this Utah team didn't have their quarterback at full health. They lost there. They did lose a game on BYU. Dampier wasn't fully healthy in that one. We started to hear more things coming out, but you still lose that game, right? We're not saying Utah shouldn't be penalized for those things, but I appreciate this committee is using the eye test and looking at some of these metrics and seeing just how dominant this Utah Utes team is. Like, for example, because BYU fans are going to be mad they dropped, right? We mentioned scoring margin. Utah's 5th. You know where BYU is? 30 spots behind them. They're 35th in the country right now. If BYU is so much better than these inferior teams that they're playing, they should be smoking them. Go on the road against Iowa State and hammer them. Leave no doubt. Don't have to keep coming from behind and finding ways to win. That Colorado game, you win that by 3. That does not look good right now with how all these other teams are hammering the Buffs and what's going on there. It has been since the last time BYU beat a P14 by 20 plus was back in early September. Like that stuff matters when we're talking about, hey, how good are you? Especially if you're not like a Texas and Oklahoma, who they've gotten quality wins against ranked teams, multiple quality wins against ranked teams, right? Because BYU has a quality win against a Utah team. But then when you don't look shaky, you're not performing well, and you go out and you get embarrassed in a big game like that, and you do get embarrassed through 4 quarters because you couldn't do anything offensively, you're going to get penalized for that. And I like that this committee is willing to do that. And we talk about how dominant Utah's looked. You can say, go right back to Georgia Tech. They have not looked dominant at all. Georgia Tech's best win was Clemson at the time. It's aged horribly. These other games, they keep finding ways to win. Like I like the win against Duke, but Duke just lost to UConn. So how much value can we put in a Duke win? I think it's a similar thing to the whole SMU thing we just talked about. So there's a lot of these teams that have warts, that have questions. I like that this committee says, who's playing the best football right now? And they're rewarding the Utah Utes. The losses have to matter. That's why Utah, as a 2-loss team, is behind a BYU who's got a head-to-head, and Texas and Oklahoma. You can look up and down and go, you know what? They have some really good wins on there too, and even a loss, right? For Texas, it's at Ohio State. What are we going to say about that? I wouldn't want to. I know we got Ohio State, the Rose Bowl, nearly beat them, but I ain't trying to go up to Columbus and take on the Buckeyes there for the Utah Utes chances there. So all these teams behind them, and the Vanderbilt as well too, right? Vanderbilt has some good wins on their resume too, but they've also stumbled here recently, and they look nowhere near as dominant as Utah did. So I'm glad Utah's dominance is being rewarded. One of the best offenses and defensively as of late in the country. The Utah Utes belong in the top 14, and I'm glad the committee kept them there despite Greg McElroy wanting to move them down. But just where do I believe the Utah Utes belong? How highly should they be ranked? And where does Shahan Jeharaja, national college football writer for CBS Sports, feel like they belong? That's what we're diving into in one moment. But first, today's show is brought to you by our great friends at Supply House. Supply House has your back. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. They have over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting on projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Need parts fast for a project? Supply House has next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. The Paint Finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. Also, their Trademaster perks like priority shipping and dedicated support make the whole process smoother. You can join the free Trademaster program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use the promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order at supplyhouse.com. Real people, real services with Supply House. CBS Sports' college football writer Shahan Jeharaja, kind enough to stop by and join me to talk about just how good this Utah team is. We saw the college football ranking where Utah ranks this week, and I feel like Utah, if you're just saying, hey, the SEC loves to talk about best teams, right? Like, where do these teams actually rank? We know what the records are, this and that. Like, how good are each of these teams? I believe Utah right now is the 12th best team in the country. They are one of just a few teams in the country. It's Indiana Tech and Utah, who are top 8 in scoring offense and defense, top 5 in scoring margin. This Utah team, the best P4 rushing offense in the country. Offensive line, fantastic. Dampier looking really good. A nasty defense with elite corners and one of the best pass rushers in the country. I truly believe this is the 12th best team in the country right now. How do you view them?
I think that 12 is very fair and honestly might be erring towards the low side of things. I think that this is a really good Utah team that just had the misfortune of running into the two teams in the Big 12 that might be better than them. Obviously, I think Texas Tech with what they did last week obviously is incredible. And BYU was also kind of fortunate to get the home game in this. You know, maybe if this game's in Salt Lake City, it goes a little differently. But I mean, I think that that's a totally fair place for them to be. I think that there's a case for them against the Texases and Oklahomas with how they've played this year. I think there's a case for them against, Notre Dame with some of the struggles they had early in the year. Like, this is a team that I think is absolutely, I said it earlier this, like a couple of weeks ago. I feel like there are 3 playoff caliber teams in the Big 12. Now, that doesn't mean that there'll be 3 teams that make the playoff, obviously. There are whatever, 6 or 7 playoff caliber teams in the SEC, and maybe 4 will make it, right? That's just kind of how the cookie crumbles. But I do think that that Utah is a really, really high quality team. And like, if you put resume aside, I mean, one thing I'll point to is that if you look at the SP Plus rankings, right, which is an advanced analytics system that is opponent adjusted and is drive to drive, kind of, it measures your overall quality as an offense and defense. Utah is number 6 in that rating, which is, I mean, pretty serious business, especially when you're comparing them to some of the teams that they're ahead of right now, like Alabama and Georgia, by the way.
Wow. I didn't know they were that high. That's impressive. And, I'm pretty sure just based on the number of the few number of teams that would actually be ahead of Utah, Utah's ahead of BYU. I think it's very interesting how this committee views head to head right now, because obviously Notre Dame is ahead of Miami, which I agree with, but obviously Miami's head to head win should count for something, but 2 teams going in different directions. BYU, look, obviously they only have 1 loss. They deserve to be ranked above Utah, but I do believe with another loss, with how impressive Utah looks, and a BYU team that the stats and numbers aren't as impressive when you look at like scoring offense, defense, scoring margin, like a lot of things we talk about. Like, this BYU team, I mean, they only beat Colorado by 3. A Utah hammers Colorado. There's other teams in the buffs, but I'm just saying this BYU team has not been a dominant force. Utah has as of lately, even though they've lost some of the best opponents they played. I think Utah is a better team than BYU as we stand here today. Who do you think is better?
Yeah, it's a good question. And one piece of this I'll say is, Kalani Sitake, if you're watching this, I would like for you to put the hammer down a little bit more in some of these games that you're obviously winning. The game that stands out to me, actually, is that West Virginia game, where they're absolutely beating the crap out of them. Like, they are destroying West Virginia, and then they kind of just are like, anyway, we don't need to keep doing this in like the third quarter. And it ends up being a 14-point game, when obviously that was not a 14-point game. Right. And so I do think that when you talk about some of that stuff, like, Utah plays with an urgency that I think is important when they're playing lesser opponents, right? To put them away, to end this game. We were talking before the show, Utah's obviously playing Baylor this week, my alma mater. Like, I think they're just going to put them away by the second quarter, right? And that's something that you love to see teams do. Well, that's kind of a philosophical thing for BYU, is that they don't care to do that to the same extent. Now, you obviously see a situation where they run into a Texas Tech team that's just able to bully them in a lot of phases of that team. I almost feel like you have to throw that out just a little bit, because, I mean, again, like, Texas Tech is just really, really good this year. But, I mean, the reality of the situation is this, right? Is that, I think that you start playing with fire when you play in close games like that. And we saw last year, BYU made it to 9-0 and then played 2 close games that they lost. And I think that they, if they're able to put those games away a little bit earlier, like, I think that they were as good as those teams that they ended up losing to. So, it's a tough question when you ask directly who's better, BYU and Utah. I think that, I mean, like, obviously they played, that is part of it. I think that, like, if you're going unit by unit, like you said, I like Utah's cornerbacks, but I like BYU's linebackers, but I like Utah's offensive line, but I like BYU's receivers, and even running back. Like again, there's kind of position battles and units that you maybe can go one way or the other on. I would give a slight edge to BYU right now, but, like, I think that it's one of those things where it's how the game goes, and at minimum, they are similar caliber of teams. And in my opinion, that is like top 10 to 12.
Yeah, and like I said, we're just talking about for who's better. BYU is going to be above Utah. They deserve to be because they have the head-to-head right now. But if you lose if you have that second loss and you don't look as impressive, that's where we are getting into slippery territory with what this committee values. I don't think that Utah is going to lose another game in the regular season. They're playing what I could honestly say are the three most disappointing Big 12 teams this season based on expectations and how short they've fallen. But that starts with Baylor this week. You said you think Utah is going to have a lot of success against Baylor. We know that Utah runs the ball well. Baylor sucks at stopping the run, to put it frankly. But what else outside of that? Why do you think the Utes are going to have a day in Waco?
Well, can we keep talking about them stopping the run? Because, oh my goodness, I think that Utah is going to be able to put them into the ground without throwing a single pass. Now, obviously, I think they will throw some passes, but like it's just a battle in the trenches that I think that Utah is going to dominate. When you look at this Baylor defense, especially, they have been so disappointing on the defensive line. And, you know, while Utah, I think, has had moments of slippage on the offensive line in some big spots, like the reality is this, like they're going to pummel a team that I think is that much lesser than them on the defensive line. Really the only guy that you kind of have to be worried about for Baylor is Jackie Marshall, their redshirt senior. And to be frank, he's been a little disappointing this year. Now, I like Baylor's linebackers fine. I actually think they're a little underrated on the back end, but like it doesn't matter when you can't get to the quarterback, when you can't move that offensive line. So I think defensively, this is just a horrendous matchup for Baylor. And even when you go the other direction, like Baylor's offensive line coach Mason Miller left mid-season due to some personal issues. I think that the unit has slipped along with him, and this is a team that also, even more than just let's say like the down to down of it, I think also just from a mentality and personality perspective, really struggles to meet the moment. I was talking with some people who are kind of around Baylor, and one thing that's really stood out to me about them is that when the defense does get a stop, which hasn't happened a lot this year, but when they do, the offense struggles to capitalize on that. They are very inconsistent when you look at some of the numbers at capitalizing on opportunities offensively. They tend to chase from behind instead of push out ahead. Against a team like Utah, who I would argue is exactly the opposite, I mean, again, this game could be 24-3 by the end of this, midway through the second quarter.
Which is crazy considering you're talking about a Sawyer Robertson who obviously can just sling it all over the field. Michael Traeger, really talented tight end. Like there's some really talented pieces this Baylor team has, but you mentioned the offensive line slipping. We already mentioned the D-line, what's happened there. And there's had some weird games, like a Cincinnati goes in and blows them out. And then sure, you bounce back against UCF. I don't really think UCF's all that great. So it's just kind of hard to figure out what version of this Baylor team we're going to get. But I tend to agree with you. I think it's going to be a big win for the Utah Utes, and the Utah Utes need to keep winning if they want to make the college football playoff. There is a path to the Big 12 getting 3 teams in and a path for the Utah Utes to be one of those teams. But how likely is it? We're going to talk about it in one moment. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. The Utah Utes are on one heck of a late push right now, and the Utah Utes, Vegas thinks, are going to have another big day out in Waco. Utah, 8.5-point favorites. And we just talked about that game a little bit more with Shahan Jeharaja. I tend to agree with him. I think Utah is going to lay a pretty good whooping down on Baylor. So I would roll with the Utah Utes big this week. But however you're feeling, you can head over to FanDuel Sportsbook today. NBA, college football, college basketball, or the NFL. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up today. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. I believe there is a path for the Big 12 to get 3 teams in the college football playoff, Shahan. If I look at Utah, if they go undefeated the rest of the way, if BYU and Tech actually go undefeated too, and you need some help a little bit, an extra SEC stumble and Notre Dame slip would definitely help, but it is crazy at this point in the season. We can talk about the Big 12 getting 3 teams in, because at the offseason, it was like, well, can they just get 2 teams in? Now we're talking about 3, and I feel like there is a legit path to get 3 in.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time, right? I mean, because look, let's look at the 2 teams right in front of Utah. You've got Texas and you've got Oklahoma. Those are 2 teams that this weekend could be eliminated from the college football playoff, depending on how things go. Texas goes to Georgia. That'll be their 3rd loss. Now, I actually do think that Texas at 9-3 has a chance because of how tough their schedule is, but like, again, you start getting into margins and stuff like that there, right? I think it becomes a lot trickier. And also, just to be frank, I think they're going to lose both to Georgia and to Texas A&M. I think those are better quality teams. For Oklahoma, they go on the road to play Alabama. I think Alabama has some flaws, but I think that Oklahoma's just going to really struggle to move the ball against a high quality defense. So if both those teams lose, again, Texas is kind of alive, but I still think that in bad shape. And for Oklahoma, I think they're officially out of it if they do lose that game. And then, yeah, like you said, I mean, then you just need, Oregon to slip up. You need Notre Dame to slip up. Like the path becomes, I mean, I'm not going to say easy, but it becomes realistic, because let's look behind as well, right? Like Vanderbilt still has to play Tennessee. Now, maybe beating Tennessee gives them a little bit of credit, but like they're already behind Utah as a 2-loss team in the standing. So I think that that's a favorable situation. I'm blanking right now who is number 14 heading into last week, but
was it Virginia?
It was Virginia. So There you go. That's not a threat necessarily.
Nope.
And then you start looking at the Georgia Techs. I think that Utah being treated the way that they are as a 2-loss team. I mean, we've never seen a Big 12 team be treated like this as a 2-loss team. I think that says a lot about, again, we talked about some of the power metrics. We talk about obviously the 2 losses that they had are two teams that are very much college football playoff contenders. And actually an ironic thing is that these are the only 3 teams ranked, although I think that there's a lot of teams that the committee would consider top 35, even if not top 25. But like having your contenders separate themselves is actually kind of what you need as a conference. It's a bad thing when you have 7 teams that are all top 22 or whatever, right? Like you want to have your clear teams that separate themselves so that they're only losing to each other and potentially picking up the power of the rest of the conference. That's what's happened in the Big 12 this year, which did not happen in the Big 12 in 2024. So I think that there's a path. It's a very narrow one, to be clear. And, obviously, I mean, one of Utah, obviously, they should win out. BYU's got a little bit of an interesting path because they've got TCU and Cincinnati. I believe that Cincinnati game probably determines who's in the Big 12 title game against Texas Tech. But if they're 11-1 heading into the final weekend, I think that I think they should be, at least. I think they'll be pretty much a lock. I think that Texas Tech, win or lose, assuming they beat UCF and West Virginia, which I'm not super concerned about that, will be a lock. And so, I mean, again, with the way that the committee has looked at Utah to this point, it's an outside chance. I want to be very clear about that, but it's not 0 chance.
You mentioned it's not good when you have a conference where multiple teams, are upsetting one another, and you get a bunch of teams that squeeze into the top 25, maybe, or like just some fringe, like not conference contenders, but teams that just poke at your best teams. That's the ACC right now. That's why the Big 12 has this path, is the ACC is falling apart, and it feels like they're only getting one in. And even if a Georgia Tech is the one who wins that league, if they get smoked by Georgia in the final game, that doesn't bode well for the rest of the ACC too. So it's just really interesting that we find ourselves here. And you mentioned Texas, Oklahoma feel very vulnerable, even if there is a path for a 3-loss Texas team into this thing, which I agree. I think it's okay if we go on to talk about a 3-loss Texas team. That's where I'm okay rewarding the fact that they went on the road to play an Ohio State team and actually only lost by 7, which actually isn't that bad. We look at how good that Ohio State team
is, but that's a whole other conversation.
That's true. You're true. Just looking back, and I saw it was 7, but you are absolutely right. But it is crazy to think just the ACC's demise just this season. This season, the ACC demise has opened the path for the Big 12 to do something that at the time we didn't think was possible.
No, and I've kind of said, like, look, in most years, I kind of view it like this, right? We're going to get 4 from the SEC. We're going to get 4 from the Big 10. This is most years, to be clear. I think that you get a combined 3 from ACC, Big 12, and Notre Dame, and then there's the group of 5, right? And so that opens the door for a lot of years, but things have worked out really well in a lot of ways, I think, for the Big 12. 1, no contender right now from the ACC. 2, Notre Dame already having 2 losses heading into this home stretch. And 3, and this is the dynamic that I don't think many people expected, including me, there's no 4th contender from the Big 10. There's only 3 total. And the 3rd one, by the way, when you talk about Oregon, they only just picked up their first ranked victory of the season because Penn State's fallen off. So I think that all of those are really significant developments for the Big 12 having a contender. Because again, the Big 10 losing one, I think, opens up maybe 4 combined between the Big 12, ACC, and Notre Dame. And then again, Notre Dame is sitting right on that line as well. They have no margin for error at this point. So like this, there are going to be years where it's not this clean, right? I mean, last year, for example, the Big 12 just kind of snuck one in, but there are going to be years where you don't have, I mean, even the SEC, let's talk about, right? Like the SEC has a number of teams that are close, but they also have a number of teams who could easily play their way out depending on how teams go. I mean, what if Oklahoma beats Alabama and then Alabama loses to Auburn? Like then they're out,
Yeah,
right?
wow.
Like this is all stuff that's on the table. And I remember I went back and looked at the kind of the final rankings or like the final playoff rankings in the playoff era since 2014. Like, I think that these last 2 years or so have skewed people's perception of what the Big 12 is capable of because, again, in 2024, no team kind of separated themselves. In 2023, Texas stood above the rest of the field. But if you look between 2014 and 2022, there's usually multiple teams at least on the cusp of the top 10. And I think that we're going to see that more often than what we saw last season.
I totally agree. And one thing that's very interesting too, as it pertains to the other conferences and where Utah sits right now, is could we see other teams leapfrog a Utah? Unfortunately, I do think that's yes. That's why I think Utah needs to not just win these games; they need to look dominant in these games. Winning all of these games by 10 plus points is optimal against Big 12 teams that, like we said, you would classify as disappointing. Because if Vandy goes undefeated, if USC upsets Oregon, I don't know how far a 2-loss Oregon team would fall. Because yes, as you mentioned, they only have the 1 ranked win, but they've been another team that has been pretty dominant overall. A lot of the numbers, scoring offense, defense, the point margin of victory, it's all very much in their favor. So if a USC were to beat them, they're another team. There's a few teams I feel like could leapfrog a Utah if Utah doesn't not just win some of these games, but doesn't dominate these teams, because other teams have the opportunity to get more impressive wins than Utah does over the course of these last 3 games, right?
No, I think that the Vanderbilt one is kind of the big one that you keep an eye on because at least right now, Tennessee's a top 25 team. I certainly don't think that they're a top 25 quality team, but that's another conversation. And so, I mean, no, that is a team that if they are 10-2, I mean, I think that an SEC team that's 10-2 is going to be in really good shape, just big picture, right? Because, yeah, there are years where the schedule isn't elite, but like, you probably have beaten enough teams that matter to get to 10-2 in the SEC that you're going to be in good shape. Vandy is going to be right on the cusp of that. But, again, I look up and down the board, like the ACC is a 1-bid league. Like there's nobody else who's going to have a chance to get in. Obviously the group of 5 will have a spot. So, you're kind of pushing for one of those other 10 spots. And I like there are teams certainly that have the ability to play their way, but I think that Vandy would be the only one that I'd be especially concerned about. But at the same time, like it's hard to ever be too confident about anything because there's so much left to happen.
The only thing I'll say really quick before we get out of here is, what if Georgia Tech actually does upset Georgia, and Georgia still only would have 2 losses in this scenario, let's say, and then Georgia Tech loses the ACC title game? Does the ACC actually get 2 teams in that way?
So, I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Because I think that, I mean, there's a couple pieces. Like, one, like it depends who that other team in the ACC is. Because, for example, like last year when you have the upset of Clemson against SMU was like number 8 in the country.
Yeah,
it would be different because let's say, for example, it's Duke, who has 4 losses already, including a loss to UConn last week. That doesn't look so good, right? It's like it just doesn't. And so, I mean, I think it's a factor that you have to take into account because, like, you look at Georgia Tech's schedule too. Like, Georgia Tech's schedule outside of Georgia is really poor, like really, really, really poor. They would have, I mean, the thing that kind of launched them to number 7 in the country was beating Clemson, and Clemson right now has a losing record, right? So, like, and the committee recognizes that, which is why they didn't rate very highly. So, it's hard for me to see it. I mean, again, you never say never with some of this stuff. And I mean, beating Georgia like that would be a big deal, right? But I still think that unless it's like, I mean, even with the SMU Clemson game last year, It went to overtime. There was a long field. Like there were all these dynamics that kind of went into it. I think you'd need kind of this perfect storm, though. It's college football. A perfect storm is always possible.
It absolutely is. And Shahan, really appreciate making the time to stop on, talk about this Utah team and just the crazy path that it is for Utah to get to a Big 12 title game. Please let everyone know where they can find and follow more of your work at.
Yeah, you can find all my work over at cbssports.com, and you can follow all of my social media at Shahan J. Araja.
Thanks again, Shahan. Appreciate making the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. We'll be back tomorrow getting you ready for the Utah Utes with an opportunity to get another win against the Baylor Bears.